It was just another Monday morning when Emily Walker's life would be completely altered. She was sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Jennifer Grayson's office, staring at the sterile walls around her, as the hum of fluorescent lights overhead echoed in her ears. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, mingling with the soft scent of her coffee, cold now. Emily hadn't even had time to finish her drink before she'd been called in. The nerves were creeping up her spine again, the same way they had been for the past few days. A routine checkup turned into something far more unsettling, and her mind raced with questions she couldn't even put into words. What if it's nothing? She tried to reassure herself. Maybe it's just a bad flu. A week or two of rest, and I'll be fine. But deep down, Emily knew something wasn't right. Her body had been feeling off for weeks, tired, sluggish, and nauseous. Her usual bursts of energy to create art, to sketch, and to breathe in the world, had been replaced by an unexplainable fatigue. Emily Walker, a nurse's voice called, snapping her out of her thoughts. She stood up, adjusting her worn leather jacket, trying to act as if she were the picture of calm. But her hands trembled slightly as she followed the nurse down the hallway, into a small exam room. The nurse left her with a quick, reassuring smile, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She sat on the examination table, swinging her legs absent-mindedly, trying to distract herself from the growing fear creeping in. She glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking loud in the otherwise silent room. Every second felt like a lifetime. The door opened. Dr. Grayson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and short, dark hair, walked in with a clipboard in hand. She had a calm, professional demeanor, but Emily could see a shadow of concern in her eyes. "Emily," Dr. Grayson started, lowering the clipboard and sitting across from her. "I'm afraid the tests came back, and I have some difficult news." Emily's heart sank. She had felt it in her gut, but hearing the words out loud made everything real. She nodded, too afraid to speak. "You've got cancer, Emily. It's a form of lymphoma. It's aggressive, but we can start treatment immediately. Chemotherapy," the doctor explained, her voice gentle but firm. The world seemed to tilt as the words sunk in. Cancer. She could barely process the sound of it. The one word she had never thought she'd hear about herself. Her hands gripped the edge of the table as she tried to steady her breathing, but it was like the walls around her were closing in. "Wait," she managed to say. "Are you sure? I mean, there's been a mistake, right? I'm healthy. I'm only 24. Dr. Grayson gave her a sympathetic smile, but Emily could see the gravity in her eyes. "I wish it were a mistake. Unfortunately, it's not. We'll need to start treatments right away. There's no time to waste." Emily's mind was reeling. Her dreams of becoming a successful artist, the life she had been building in Los Angeles, everything was suddenly in jeopardy. She didn't know how to react. Anger, fear, denial, they all swirled in her chest like a storm that had no clear end. "Chemotherapy," she whispered, trying to grasp what the doctor was saying. "That's going to cost a lot of money, right?" Dr. Grayson nodded solemnly. "Yes. The treatments are expensive, and insurance might cover part of it, but not all of it." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't just fighting for her life now, she was fighting for her future, for her dreams. And she had no idea how to make it all work. "Do you have a support system?" Dr. Grayson asked. "Family? Friends?" Emily hesitated. She had her mother, Karen, who had always been her biggest cheerleader. But her father had passed away when she was young, and her mom had struggled to make ends meet as a single parent. There was no room for them to cover the cost of chemotherapy. She had a few close friends, sure, but none who were in a position to help with the financial strain. She was on her own, and now, more than ever, that reality seemed suffocating. "I'll figure it out," she finally said, even though the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her words. Dr. Grayson gave her an encouraging nod. We'll get through this, Emily. You're strong. You can do this. But as Emily walked out of the clinic, the weight of the diagnosis bore down on her like an anchor. She had always prided herself on her independence, but now, she felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. How could she keep going? How could she afford this treatment? And what about her art? Her creative soul felt like it was the one thing that kept her alive, but now, it seemed so far out of reach. Later that night, Emily sat in her small apartment in downtown LA, staring at a canvas that had been sitting untouched for days. It was a piece she had been excited about, a landscape of the Pacific Ocean, vibrant with color. But now, looking at it, all she could feel was emptiness. How could she focus on painting when her life was hanging in the balance? Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and a small, bitter laugh escaped her lips. It was a notification from her art-selling platform. She had sold one of her pieces earlier that week to help pay for some bills, but now, it felt so insignificant compared to the mountain of medical costs she was facing. How did I get here? She thought, her mind spiraling. And yet, as she stared at the screen, something inside her flickered. She wasn't ready to give up, not yet. She would fight. She would fight for her health, for her art, and for the future she had dreamed of. She tapped out a quick post on her social media account. Hey everyone. I need your help. I've been diagnosed with cancer, and I need to raise money for treatment. I'm going to be selling my artwork to help with the costs. If you want to support me, please check out my auction. Any purchase will help. Thank you all for your love and support. With a deep breath, she hit post. It was a desperate move, but it was all she had left. Then, as she scrolled through her feed, something caught her eye, a message from a follower. It wasn't just any follower, it was Clint Eastwood's official account. She blinked twice, not sure if she was imagining things. Was this real? The message read, I've been following your work for a while. I'm moved by your story. I'd like to help you. Let's talk soon. Emily's heart stopped. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. Her hands shook as she typed a response, her mind racing. Is this for real? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily Walker had always believed that art was more than just a form of self-expression, it was the lens through which she saw the world. Growing up in a small, modest apartment in the outskirts of Los Angeles, Emily's world had always been filled with creativity, despite the financial struggles her family faced. Her mother, Karen Walker, worked long hours as a waitress at a local diner to make ends meet, but still found time to nurture Emily's love for painting and drawing. Karen, though tired and overworked, always made sure to encourage her daughter's passion, believing that art was the one thing that could carry her through life's toughest challenges. Emily, her mother would say as they sat at their cramped kitchen table, don't ever let anyone tell you your dreams are too big. Keep drawing, keep painting. One day, it'll all pay off. I promise. Emily had always believed her mother's words, even as they seemed more like wishful thinking than reality. But in the world of art, Emily had found solace. When life became too overwhelming, when the world outside felt cold and indifferent, she would turn to her canvases. The colors, the strokes, the way paint would transform into something beautiful, it was the one thing that allowed her to forget the outside world, even if just for a little while. As a child, Emily's artistic ability had been evident from an early age. She would draw on anything she could find, scraps of paper, napkins from the diner, old cardboard boxes. Karen had always done her best to provide for her, but there were never extra funds for art supplies. So, Emily made do with what she had. And yet, every piece she created was full of passion, emotion, and hope. She had spent hours at the local library, flipping through art books, learning about great masters like Van Gogh, Picasso, and Monet. It was there that she first understood the power of art to tell a story. These were the stories that moved people, stories that transcended time, language, and culture. Emily knew, even as a young girl, that her purpose was to create, to share her voice with the world through paint and canvas. But like most dreams, Emily's path hadn't been easy. Throughout her teenage years, she juggled her schoolwork with odd jobs to help her mom pay rent. She worked weekends at a coffee shop, served food at her mom's diner when the hours grew too long, and sometimes picked up shifts as a dog walker just to scrape by. Still, she found time to create. When the world around her felt unkind, she painted. Her art became her escape, the only thing that reminded her of the beauty still left in the world. It was during her high school years that Emily began to gain attention for her work. One of her teachers, Mr. Reynolds, saw her potential and encouraged her to enter local art competitions. To Emily's surprise, she won several awards, and soon, her paintings were being featured in small galleries and art shows around the city. But the recognition didn't change her circumstances. The money was modest, and it never lasted long enough to keep up with the bills. After high school, Emily decided to attend the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, where she majored in fine arts. It was a dream come true for her, a chance to hone her skills, to immerse herself in the world of professional artists, and to take her creativity to new heights. However, the reality of college life was tough. Emily struggled to keep up with tuition fees, rent, and living expenses, often working 2 or 3 part-time jobs just to survive. But she never gave up on her art. She would spend late nights in the university's art studios, her hands covered in paint, her mind consumed by new ideas. It wasn't easy, and there were times when Emily felt like giving up, like maybe the dream of being a successful artist was too far out of reach. But there was one thing she always remembered, her mother's voice telling her to keep going. One day, it'll all pay off. It was this belief that kept Emily going through the tough times, even when she couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. By the time she graduated from UCLA, Emily had built a modest following online. She started posting her artwork on social media, and slowly but surely, she began gaining recognition. Her Instagram account, where she shared her pieces, had gained a few thousand followers, many of whom were genuinely invested in her work. She had started selling her art on various platforms, and though it wasn't enough to fully support her, it was a step in the right direction. Emily had been living in Los Angeles for 3 years now, and her life was starting to look up. She had a small studio apartment in the downtown area, which she decorated with her own paintings and vintage furniture she had picked up at local thrift stores. Every corner of the apartment felt like a reflection of who she was, creative, passionate, and unafraid to embrace the challenges of her life. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Still, the struggle to make ends meet never ceased. There were good days, of course, days when Emily could feel the excitement of her success, like when one of her paintings sold to a private collector, or when her art was featured in a small online art magazine. These moments kept her going, but they were few and far between. And when those moments passed, Emily would return to the same worries. How would she pay her rent this month? How could she afford the art supplies she needed for her next piece? How long could she keep fighting this uphill battle? But Emily had always been a fighter. She knew that no matter how difficult things got, she couldn't give up on her art. Her paintings were her voice, the one thing that defined her, the one thing that made sense in an often chaotic and confusing world. And so, when the opportunity arose to sell a few of her pieces to raise money for bills, she took it. She didn't hesitate, even though it broke her heart to part with her work. She told herself it was temporary, that it was a small sacrifice in the grand scheme of things. But the idea of losing a part of herself, even for a moment, was overwhelming. It was around this time that Emily started feeling the first signs of something more serious. She began to feel more exhausted than usual, the fatigue creeping up on her like a shadow she couldn't shake. She pushed through it at first, telling herself it was just stress, just the result of her busy life. But then came the nausea, the weight loss, and the sense that her body was betraying her. Still, she couldn't afford to slow down. There were bills to pay, art to create, and dreams to chase. But now, everything had changed. Emily had been thrown into a world she had never imagined, a world where survival wasn't just about money or success, but about her health. The cancer diagnosis had shattered her sense of normalcy, and she had no idea how to pick up the pieces. Her mind kept racing back to Clint Eastwood's message. Could this be real? She wondered. She had never imagined someone like him, an icon, a legend, would even know she existed, let alone want to help her. Could he really be offering her support in this difficult time? The uncertainty of her diagnosis, coupled with the sudden outpouring of unexpected kindness, left Emily feeling like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain, she wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when she had so much more to fight for. Her journey was just beginning. The next few days felt like a blur to Emily. The reality of her cancer diagnosis had sunk in, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. She had always been a person who loved to have control over her life. She knew her art was her path forward, her ticket to a better life, even though it had come with struggles. But now, cancer had torn that stability apart. With each passing hour, Emily found herself faced with a new wave of emotions, anger, frustration, fear, and confusion. She couldn't ignore the facts, she needed chemotherapy, and it was expensive. She had already drained her savings on art supplies, rent, and the few bills she could cover, but this was different. This was life or death. How was she supposed to handle the financial burden of cancer treatment when she was barely scraping by as it was? As she scrolled through her phone late that night, her eyes kept returning to the message from Clint Eastwood. The more she read it, the more surreal it seemed. Was this really happening? The man who had defined so many iconic moments in Hollywood history, who had inspired generations, was reaching out to her. It almost felt like a dream. And yet, the message was as clear as day: I've been following your work for a while. I'm moved by your story. I'd like to help you. Let's talk soon. She had spent the evening thinking about it. The logical part of her mind told her it was probably just a fan or someone managing Clint's account. But something about the sincerity of the message made her hesitate. What if it was real? What if Clint Eastwood, of all people, was genuinely offering help? Unable to sleep, Emily stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, she gathered the courage to reply. Hi, Mr. Eastwood. I can't believe you're reaching out. Your message means so much to me. I'd love to talk and learn more about how you want to help. I'm currently facing a health crisis, and any support would be a huge blessing. Thank you for thinking of me. She hit send and waited. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was this really going to happen? The next morning, Emily felt her phone buzz in her hand. She glanced at the screen and saw that Clint had replied. Her breath caught in her throat as she opened the message. Emily, I'm glad to hear from you. Let's set up a time to talk in more detail. I believe you have an incredible talent, and I want to help you through this tough time. Don't worry about the details yet, we'll figure this out together. I'll have my assistant reach out with the specifics. Her hands shook as she read the message again. This was real. Clint Eastwood, the legend, was offering to help her during one of the most difficult times of her life. For a moment, Emily couldn't breathe. But as her initial shock faded, a wave of skepticism washed over her. She had been burned before by people who promised help but failed to deliver. Could she really trust this? What if it turned out to be a scam? What if this was just some publicity stunt? She had no way of knowing if it was legitimate or not. Still, there was something about Clint's words that felt genuine. Emily had always been a good judge of character, and the sincerity in his message made her believe that perhaps, just perhaps, this could be her turning point. I'll take the risk, she whispered to herself. What do I have to lose? The next few days were filled with anxious anticipation. Emily tried to keep herself busy with her art, though it was hard to concentrate. The weight of her diagnosis loomed over everything she did. But she kept painting, one stroke at a time. It was the one thing that still made sense. Then, as promised, Clint Eastwood's assistant called to arrange a video call. Emily could barely believe what was happening. The assistant, a calm and professional woman named Laura, explained that Clint would be available the following afternoon. When the day finally arrived, Emily was a bundle of nerves. She cleaned her apartment, making sure everything looked presentable, and set up her laptop for the call. She had worn her favorite old sweater, something cozy that reminded her of the comfort her mother had always provided. She wasn't sure why she'd chosen it, but somehow it felt important. At exactly 3 p.m., her phone rang. She answered quickly, her heart racing as she stared at the screen. And there he was, Clint Eastwood, his face filled with the same rugged charm she'd seen in countless movies. He looked older, of course, but there was no mistaking him. It was the man himself. "Hello, Emily," Clint said, his voice smooth and calming. "How are you doing today?" Her mouth went dry. "I'm doing okay, Mr. Eastwood. It's hard to believe I'm actually talking to you right now." Clint chuckled softly. "I get that a lot. But let's focus on you for a moment. I've been following your work for some time. Your art is impressive, and I think you have a real future ahead of you. But I understand things have been tough lately. I want to help however I can." The sincerity in his voice made her heart swell. This wasn't just about her art. This was about her health, her future, and the chance to fight for her life. Emily felt a lump in her throat, but she pushed it down. I don't even know what to say," she stammered. "This has all happened so fast. I was just trying to raise money to cover my medical bills, and now, here you are. I don't know what to think." Clint leaned forward slightly, his eyes focused and serious. "Emily, I understand this is overwhelming. I know you've been going through a lot, and I want to make sure you don't have to face this alone. I'm prepared to cover the cost of your treatments. But it's not just about the money. I want to help you get back on your feet, to continue doing what you love. Art is a powerful thing. It can heal, it can inspire. I want to be part of that journey for you." Emily's mind reeled. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. It was more than she had ever imagined, and it was all happening because of a simple message from someone she admired. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're going to help me?" Clint smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "Yes, I'm serious. We'll get you the help you need. But I also want to see you succeed. Your art deserves to be seen by the world." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and she blinked rapidly to keep them from spilling over. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "This is real." Clint continued, "Let's start by getting your treatment covered. Once that's sorted, we'll discuss how to take your art to the next level. But for now, focus on getting better. That's the most important thing." As the conversation ended, Emily felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She didn't know how long this would last, or what her future held, but for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something good. This wasn't just about survival, it was about living again. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to hope. Emily sat back in her chair, trying to process what had just happened. She'd spoken to Clint Eastwood. He had promised to help her. It was surreal, like something out of a movie, and yet, there it was, real life, unfolding in a way she could never have anticipated. The days following that conversation felt like a whirlwind. Clint's team acted quickly. Within hours, Emily received calls from doctors, financial advisors, and insurance representatives. All the details were being worked out, and soon, the costs of her chemotherapy were covered. The weight that had been bearing down on her, how she would pay for her treatment, how she would afford to survive, began to lift, even if just a little. It was like a door had swung open, offering her a chance she never thought she would have. But despite this incredible gesture, there was a part of Emily that still couldn't fully believe it. There were so many things in life she'd fought for, so many times she had been let down, that the idea of someone, especially someone as famous and powerful as Clint Eastwood, genuinely wanting to help her felt like a dream she was afraid to wake up from. Still, she pushed aside the doubts. For once in her life, she would allow herself to accept the help, to lean into the kindness being offered. She couldn't afford to hold back anymore. The first round of chemotherapy was scheduled, and the weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, treatment rooms, and unexpected fatigue. At first, Emily struggled with the physical toll the chemotherapy took on her body. The treatments made her nauseous, left her weak, and dulled her senses. But despite the pain, she painted. She painted through the exhaustion, through the moments when she felt like she couldn't go on. The canvas became her sanctuary, a place where the reality of illness couldn't touch her. Her art, once a way to escape, had now become a method of survival. With each brushstroke, she fought the darkness inside her. During her treatments, she began to receive messages from people who had heard about her story. Strangers reached out to her through social media, offering words of encouragement. Her followers on Instagram had grown exponentially after Clint's involvement, and Emily's art began to gain more recognition than ever before. It was strange, but in a way, the overwhelming support from her fans and from people all over the world gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't had in years. Her paintings, vibrant and raw, reflected the tumultuous journey she was on. She didn't shy away from the darkness, nor did she ignore the glimmers of light that peeked through the cracks of her life. In one piece, she captured the moment of fear when she first learned about her diagnosis, dark blues and grays swirling across the canvas. But beside it, in the same painting, was a splash of orange and yellow, a symbol of the hope that had come through Clint's unexpected offer. Emily found strength in her art. It became a way to process everything, her illness, her fears, her gratitude for Clint's support. And as she painted, she couldn't help but wonder about the next step in her journey. She had a new chance at life, a chance to not only survive but to truly live. She couldn't waste it. But how? As the weeks passed, Emily began to focus more on her future. Clint had helped her cover the immediate financial burden, but now she felt a sense of responsibility to do more with the opportunity he had given her. She couldn't let this support go to waste. She needed to push her art further, reach more people, and use this new platform to not only heal herself but to give back. It was then that she decided to reach out to Clint again. She wasn't sure what to ask for, but she knew that her future, her life, was in his hands, at least for the time being. She sat down one afternoon, her brush still in hand, and typed a message to Clint's assistant. "Hello, Laura. I hope all is well. I've been thinking a lot about what Clint offered and what I can do to make the most of this opportunity. I want to do more than just survive. I want to create something that will inspire people, something that will allow me to give back. Would it be possible to talk with Clint about possibly collaborating on an art show or an exhibition? I have so many ideas, and I want to push my boundaries as an artist, but I need guidance. His advice would mean the world to me." She pressed send and sat back, feeling a wave of both excitement and fear. What if Clint didn't take her seriously? What if he thought her request was ridiculous? She didn't want to seem ungrateful, but she couldn't help the desire for something more. She needed to move forward. Hours passed before she received a response. Laura had arranged a video call for the following day, and Emily felt the same nerves creep up in her stomach. She hadn't expected it to be this quick, and the thought of speaking to Clint again made her both excited and anxious. The next day, at the designated time, Clint appeared on the screen. He was smiling, as always, and greeted Emily warmly. "Hey, Emily. How are you doing? How's the treatment going? I'm doing okay, she replied, trying to sound upbeat. The treatment's hard, but I'm managing. And the support I've been getting, especially from you, has been a lifesaver. Clint nodded. That's good to hear. But I know there's something else you want to talk about. What's on your mind? Emily hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts before speaking. I've been thinking a lot about what I can do next. You've given me the chance to fight for my life, but I want to do something with it. I want to create something that gives back, something that shows how much I appreciate everything that's been done for me. I was wondering if you'd consider collaborating with me on an art show or exhibition, maybe something that highlights the healing power of art. I know it's a big ask, but I feel like this is my chance to make something happen. Clint sat back for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Emily held her breath, unsure of what his response would be. Emily, Clint finally said, his voice steady, I think that's a great idea. Art can heal, and it can inspire. I believe in you, and I believe in your art. We'll figure something out, okay? Let's make it happen. You've already shown incredible strength, and I want to help you take it to the next level. Emily's heart soared. This was more than she had ever hoped for. Clint Eastwood, the man who had helped her when she needed it the most, was now encouraging her to take her art further than she ever thought possible. I don't know what to say, Emily whispered, overwhelmed with emotion. Thank you. Thank you so much. Clint smiled. You've earned it. Let's make this happen, Emily. We're in this together. As the conversation ended, Emily sat in silence, the enormity of what had just happened slowly sinking in. She was on the cusp of something monumental, something she had dreamed of for years. This wasn't just about cancer, or about surviving, it was about living, about embracing the gift of a second chance. And with Clint's support, she felt like she could do anything. Her journey had only just begun. The next few weeks unfolded in a blur of activity. Emily could hardly keep up with the momentum of everything that was happening. Clint's team had mobilized quickly, arranging for her to have the best possible care and for her art to receive more exposure than she'd ever imagined. The chemotherapy continued, draining her physically, but she was more determined than ever. Each stroke of the brush felt like a tiny act of rebellion against the illness that sought to steal her life. Painting had become her lifeline. But the real shift began when Clint's offer to collaborate on an art exhibition became more than just talk. It was happening. Clint had offered to sponsor a solo art show that would be held in Los Angeles, and the plans were being made. Emily could hardly believe it. She had gone from struggling to pay for her cancer treatment to preparing for an art show that could change her life forever. It was everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of. As the days ticked by, Emily began to create new pieces for the exhibition. It wasn't just about showcasing her art, it was about telling her story. The pieces she had been creating during her treatment were the most raw and vulnerable works she had ever done. They showed the darkness of her illness, the struggle, the pain, but they also reflected the resilience that was rising from within her. Her art had become her personal narrative, and she was sharing it with the world. The night before the exhibition opened, Emily sat in her small apartment, staring at the pieces that would soon hang in a prestigious gallery. She ran her hands over the canvas of the largest painting, a piece that represented the dichotomy of fear and hope. It was her most ambitious work yet. The dark blues and blacks represented the weight of her diagnosis, but the fiery oranges and reds symbolized the strength she had found in the face of it all. The colors seemed to pulse with life, almost as if the painting itself was breathing. For the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something extraordinary. But there was a knot in her stomach, an undeniable fear. She was afraid of what the exhibition would mean. What if no one came? What if her work wasn't good enough? What if Clint's faith in her had been misplaced? She shook her head, trying to push the doubts away. This wasn't just about the art show, it was about everything she had been through. It was about her life, her fight, and the journey she had taken to get to this moment. No matter what happened at the exhibition, she had already won by being here, by making it through. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Clint. "Emily, I hope you're doing well. I know tomorrow is big for you. I just wanted to remind you that no matter what happens, you've already accomplished something incredible. I'm proud of you." Her eyes welled with tears as she read his words. She had never met Clint in person, but somehow, through his support, she felt like she had found a mentor, a friend. Someone who believed in her when the world seemed uncertain. She typed a quick reply, trying to hold back her emotions. "Thank you so much, Clint. You have no idea how much this means to me. I'll give it my all tomorrow." Clint's response came almost immediately. "I know you will. You've got this." The next day, as she stood in front of the gallery, the nerves hit her like a wave. The building was sleek and modern, its glass walls reflecting the sun, but inside, it was alive with the energy of anticipation. The walls were adorned with her work, vivid, emotional pieces that told the story of her struggle with cancer, of the battles she had fought, and of the hope that had carried her through. The exhibition was packed with people, art lovers, critics, celebrities, and supporters. Emily felt like a small fish in a very big pond. She had never imagined that her art would be displayed like this. It was one thing to have your work in a small gallery, but this was something else entirely. This was a statement, a declaration that she was more than just her illness. As she walked through the gallery, her heart pounded in her chest. People were stopping in front of her paintings, whispering to one another, nodding in approval. The emotions she had poured into each piece were coming to life before her eyes. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. But then, she saw him. Clint Eastwood had arrived, looking every bit the Hollywood legend he was. He stood across the room, talking to a group of art critics, his presence commanding attention. When he saw Emily, his face broke into a warm, genuine smile. He excused himself from the conversation and made his way over to her. "Emily," Clint said, his voice warm but full of gravitas. "This is amazing. Your work, it's powerful." She didn't know what to say. She had expected Clint to be proud of her, but hearing him speak those words meant more than anything she had imagined. She smiled, her throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, Clint. I'm so grateful for everything you've done for me. I never thought I'd be here." "You've earned it," Clint replied. "You've got a story to tell, and the world needs to hear it. Your art has a way of touching people, of showing them something real. That's not something everyone can do." Tears welled in her eyes as Clint's words sank in. This was it. This was the moment that everything had been building toward. Emily had no idea what the future held, but standing there, in front of her paintings, with Clint by her side, she knew that whatever came next, she had already won. She had found her voice again. As the evening wore on, the buzz around her art show grew. People were talking about her work, praising her vulnerability, her courage. The exhibition had become a success, but to Emily, it was so much more than that. It was the culmination of her fight, not just against cancer, but against doubt, fear, and the sense that she might never be good enough. It was in that moment that Emily realized something profound: she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and her art, her life, was a testament to that. As the evening drew to a close, Clint pulled her aside. "Emily, I think you've just started something huge," he said. "I'm proud of you. Let's keep pushing. Let's see where this goes." Emily felt a smile spread across her face. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but for the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And that was enough. The weeks following the exhibition were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and media attention. Emily's art was making waves, not just in the art world, but beyond it. People were beginning to recognize her name. It was both thrilling and overwhelming. The attention was something she had never expected, and yet, it felt like the only way forward. She couldn't afford to stop now. Her paintings had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of art in healing. News outlets began to feature stories about her journey with cancer, her fight to survive, and how her art was helping others cope with their own struggles. There was even talk of a documentary being made about her life. But as exciting as it all was, Emily found herself struggling with the weight of it. Her chemotherapy treatments were taking a toll on her, and while her body seemed to be holding up, the emotional and mental strain was starting to show. She had a new platform now, a new responsibility, and with it, a new set of challenges. She sat in her studio one evening, staring at her easel. The paintbrush in her hand felt heavy. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the usual surge of inspiration. Instead, she felt exhausted. It wasn't the kind of exhaustion that came from physical effort, it was the kind that came from trying to keep up with everything, from the whirlwind of expectations that now surrounded her. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Clint. "Emily, how's everything going? I've been hearing great things about your show. You've got the world's attention now. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help keep things moving forward." She smiled faintly as she read the message, grateful for Clint's unwavering support. But the truth was, she was starting to feel overwhelmed by it all. She knew Clint was only trying to help, but it felt like the pressure was mounting, pressure to create, to succeed, to live up to everyone's expectations. She typed a quick response. "Thanks, Clint. Everything's going well, but I'm just trying to catch my breath. I didn't expect all of this attention, and it's a little overwhelming." Seconds later, his reply came. "I get it. You're doing amazing things, Emily. But don't forget to take care of yourself too. The art will be there when you're ready. Don't let the pressure get to you." She took a deep breath, his words settling in. It wasn't easy to take a step back when everything around her was moving at such a fast pace, but Clint was right. She couldn't let the external pressures consume her. She had to find balance. Days passed, and Emily found herself on the phone with her doctor more than once, adjusting her treatment schedule and discussing ways to manage her health while still keeping up with her art. It wasn't easy, but she was determined. She realized that her journey wasn't just about fighting cancer, it was about taking control of her own story, about not letting the disease define her. She also began to lean more into her support network. Her friends, her family, and even the strangers who had reached out to her after hearing her story, these people had become her anchor. They reminded her that she wasn't alone, no matter how isolated she sometimes felt in the midst of everything. One afternoon, as she was preparing for another round of chemotherapy, Emily received a call from an unexpected source. It was Laura, Clint's assistant. "Emily, I hope you're doing well," Laura said with her usual calm tone. "Clint wanted me to reach out to you. He's planning a charity event, an auction to raise funds for cancer research, and he wants to know if you'd be willing to contribute a piece of art. He's been really impressed with what you're doing, and he thinks this would be a great opportunity to give back." Emily's heart skipped a beat. A charity auction? The idea of her work being auctioned off for such a meaningful cause felt surreal. It was one thing to sell her art for her own survival, but this was different. This was about using her art to make a tangible difference in the world. She hesitated for only a moment before replying, "Of course. I would be honored." The charity event was scheduled for a few months down the road, but the planning was already in full swing. Emily was creating new pieces, and she couldn't help but pour even more of herself into each brushstroke. It was as if the act of giving back was giving her the strength she needed to keep going. It was the first time in a long while that she felt like her art could truly make an impact, not just in her own life, but in the lives of others. She kept the charity event in mind as she continued to push through her chemotherapy treatments. It wasn't easy, but it gave her something to look forward to, something to work toward. She was starting to realize that her art, which had been a way for her to process her pain, was now becoming a force for good. But as the event drew closer, Emily's body began to show signs of fatigue. The toll of the treatments was becoming too much to ignore. She had been so focused on her art, on making sure everything went smoothly with the exhibition and the auction, that she had neglected to take care of herself in the ways that she should. The exhaustion, both physical and emotional, began to catch up with her. One afternoon, as she sat in her studio, her head began to spin. Her vision blurred, and she felt a sudden wave of dizziness. She stumbled, gripping the edge of her easel for support. For a brief moment, everything around her felt like it was spinning out of control. "Emily? Are you okay?" a voice called from the door. She turned to see her best friend, Sarah, standing there with wide eyes. She had been so absorbed in her work that she hadn't even noticed her friend had arrived. "I'm fine," Emily said weakly, trying to steady herself. I'm a little tired." Sarah walked over quickly, concern etched on her face. "Emily, you've been pushing yourself too hard. I think it's time to slow down for a bit." Emily opened her mouth to protest but then closed it. She knew Sarah was right. She couldn't keep running on empty forever. For the first time in a while, Emily allowed herself to take a step back, to listen to her body and to the people who cared about her. It was a hard lesson to learn, but she understood now. She didn't have to do everything alone, and she didn't have to shoulder all the pressure. Her journey wasn't just about surviving cancer, it was about living fully, finding balance, and learning that sometimes, asking for help was the most powerful thing she could do. The charity auction was fast approaching, and with it, a wave of mixed emotions for Emily. She had finally begun to find some semblance of balance in her life, but the pressure of preparing for the event still loomed large. The exhaustion from the treatments lingered, but she had learned to pace herself more carefully, listening to her body when it demanded rest and giving herself grace when she didn't feel up to painting every day. Her artwork had become the center of her world. The art show in Los Angeles had ignited a spark, and now her pieces were not only symbols of her fight but also sources of inspiration for others facing similar battles. The upcoming charity auction was her chance to turn that inspiration into tangible change. As the date for the auction approached, Emily spent her days finishing the last of the pieces she'd agreed to donate. These new paintings were different from anything she had done before. They weren't just about her personal journey with cancer anymore, they were about hope, healing, and the collective strength of those fighting alongside her. She'd woven the stories of her supporters, the people who had stood by her, into these pieces. Each one was a tribute to those who fought their battles in silence, and to the people who refused to let life define them. The more she worked on these pieces, the more she realized how far she had come. She was no longer just an artist in the middle of a battle. She had become a voice for those who felt voiceless. Her paintings were speaking to people in ways she had never imagined. Still, as the day of the auction neared, the pressure mounted. She had made a commitment to Clint, and now she had to deliver. The night before the charity auction, Clint called her. The sound of his familiar voice was a comfort, a reminder that through all of this chaos, there were still people who believed in her, people who had become a part of her journey. "Emily, how are you holding up?" Clint asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. "I'm good. Just a little nervous, honestly. I want this to go well, not just for me, but for the cause. This event is bigger than anything I've ever done, and I don't want to let anyone down." "You won't," Clint reassured her. "You've already done so much. This is about more than the auction, more than the art. It's about giving hope, and you've done that in spades." She smiled softly at his words, grateful for the constant support he offered. But despite his encouragement, the weight of the upcoming event felt heavy on her shoulders. I'm not sure I'm ready for the attention," she confessed. "What if the auction doesn't go well? What if no one cares about the art?" "Emily, listen to me," Clint said, his tone firm. You've created something real, something powerful. The people who need to see it will. But even if the auction doesn't bring in millions, what matters is that you've made an impact. Your art is already changing lives, including mine. This isn't about a price tag, it's about the message. You've already succeeded. His words were a balm for her anxieties. Slowly, she began to feel her nerves settle. She had put everything into her work, and at the end of the day, that was all she could control. Everything else was beyond her hands. The night of the charity auction arrived, and Emily found herself standing in the back of the elegant ballroom, gazing at the large crowd that had gathered. The space was filled with people, celebrities, philanthropists, art lovers, and cancer survivors. It was a sea of faces, all here for one purpose, to raise money for cancer research. And at the heart of it all was her art. The paintings were displayed on large easels throughout the room, each one telling its own story, each one representing the countless battles fought in the name of survival. Emily's heart raced as she watched people stop in front of her work, pausing to take in the emotion that radiated from the canvas. She was used to being the artist, behind the scenes, observing her work from afar. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was part of something much bigger than herself. Clint was there, of course, and he moved through the room, engaging with guests and talking about the importance of supporting cancer research. Emily caught sight of him across the room, and their eyes met. Clint gave her a reassuring smile, nodding as if to say, "You've got this." She took a deep breath and walked toward her first painting of the evening, a piece she had titled "The Flame of Hope." It was a vibrant piece, full of bright oranges and yellows, depicting a figure standing tall in a sea of darkness. The figure was small, but the light surrounding it seemed to burn brighter than everything else. A group of guests stood in front of the painting, talking quietly among themselves. Emily hesitated for a moment, but then she gathered her courage and approached them. One of the women turned to her and smiled. "This one is beautiful. It's so vibrant, there's something about it that feels hopeful." Emily's heart swelled with pride. This was it. This was the reason she had painted. To reach people, to make them feel something beyond their own struggles. "I'm glad you like it," Emily said softly. "I created it to represent how even in our darkest moments, there is always something, someone, that can light the way." The woman nodded, her eyes misting over. "You've captured that perfectly. This piece has so much strength in it." Emily smiled, feeling the weight of her journey lift, if only for a moment. She had given everything to these paintings, and seeing people connect with them in such a personal way was the greatest gift she could have asked for. The evening continued, and as the auction began, Emily watched as her pieces sold for amounts she had never dreamed of. The generosity of the bidders, the enthusiasm for her work, was humbling. But the most moving moment of all came when her largest piece, The Journey Forward, was bid on by a couple in the front row. It sold for a sum far beyond what she had expected. The gavel came down, signaling the end of the auction. A cheer erupted from the crowd, and Clint came over to Emily, his eyes shining with pride. "You did it, Emily," Clint said, his voice full of emotion. "You've not only raised money for a good cause, but you've inspired everyone in this room." Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had done it. The night had been a success beyond her wildest dreams. She had faced her fears, pushed through the pressure, and come out the other side stronger than ever. And it wasn't just about the money, it was about the impact. Her art had touched hearts. It had given hope. As the evening wound down, Emily realized something crucial: this was only the beginning. She had a long road ahead, but now, she wasn't walking it alone. She had found her purpose, her voice, and her strength. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready for whatever came next. The weeks following the charity auction were a whirlwind. Emily's work had raised more funds than she ever thought possible, and the momentum from the event was far from fading. She had gone from a relatively unknown artist, fighting through the harsh realities of cancer, to a name that was being recognized in galleries, art shows, and charity circles. The buzz around her work didn't just stop after the auction, it continued to build, wave after wave, like a powerful current that wouldn't let her go. However, despite the success, Emily was beginning to feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. The pressure of living up to the expectations of people who now saw her as an inspiration was becoming overwhelming. She had pushed herself beyond her limits to prepare for the auction, but now, with all eyes on her, the desire to maintain that level of success began to take a toll. She had given her all to her art, to the cause, and to the fight against cancer. But it was starting to feel like she was living for everyone else's approval, not her own. Every phone call, every interview, every request for her time, it was as if she couldn't catch her breath. It wasn't just the public attention that was difficult to handle, it was the emotional toll of being constantly in the spotlight. She began to wonder if anyone truly understood how hard it was to balance her art, her health, and the constant pressure to remain a symbol of strength. One afternoon, as Emily sat in her studio, staring at her latest painting, she felt an unexpected sense of emptiness. The room was filled with the smell of fresh paint, and yet, the vibrant colors on the canvas in front of her seemed to blur together. It wasn't that the work was bad, it was just that it felt disconnected from her heart. She had always used her art as a way to process her emotions, to heal, but now, it felt like the very act of painting had become something she was expected to do. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Sarah, her best friend, holding a small bag of takeout. "Hey, you okay?" Sarah asked as she stepped inside, setting the food down on the table. Emily smiled weakly. "Yeah, just, trying to get into the zone. But I don't know. It's like I've lost my spark." Sarah raised an eyebrow, sitting down across from her. "Your spark? You mean the spark that got you through all this? You've been on fire lately. You raised a ton of money for cancer research, Emily. You're literally changing lives. What are you talking about?" "I know," Emily replied, shaking her head. "It's just. I don't know. I thought once I reached this point, I'd feel better. I thought that all the success would make everything feel more right. But now I'm just exhausted. I don't know how to keep up with it all." Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching her friend closely. "Emily, it's okay to not be okay. You're human. I know this journey has been incredible, but you don't have to do everything all at once. You're not failing. You're living, and that's enough." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "I feel like I'm letting everyone down. Like I'm supposed to be this perfect example of strength, but I don't feel strong anymore." "Listen," Sarah said gently, "you're allowed to take breaks. You're allowed to need time for yourself. And you're allowed to not always be the hero. You've already done so much. The people who admire you, like Clint, like me, they're not expecting perfection. They're expecting you." Those words hit her harder than she expected. "They're expecting you." Emily had spent so much of her life trying to live up to expectations, of her family, her friends, the world around her, that she'd lost sight of her own needs. She had been so focused on being a beacon of hope for others that she had forgotten to give herself permission to just be. The next morning, Emily made a decision. She would take a break. She wasn't going to stop painting altogether, art was still a part of her, but she would allow herself to step back from the pressure, to let go of the constant drive to be everything to everyone. Instead of diving into her next project, she spent the next few days focusing on herself. She went for walks in the park, watched movies with Sarah, and even took a yoga class. She felt the stress gradually lift off her shoulders as she began to reconnect with herself, not as an artist, not as a symbol of strength, but simply as Emily. She reached out to Clint to let him know that she was taking some time off. He was, as always, understanding and supportive. "Emily," he said over the phone, "I'm proud of everything you've accomplished, but you need to do what's best for you. Take care of yourself. The world can wait. His words filled her with gratitude. Clint had been a constant presence in her life, supporting her not only as a mentor but as a friend. She realized that it wasn't just the accolades and the success that mattered, it was the relationships she had built along the way. It was the people who cared about her as a person, not just as the artist they saw in the gallery. A few weeks later, Emily returned to her studio with a renewed sense of clarity. She had spent her time recharging, and now, she was ready to dive back into her work, but this time, she was doing it for herself. She picked up her paintbrush, but this time, it wasn't about creating the perfect piece for the auction or meeting the expectations of others. It was about creating something that reflected her heart, something that allowed her to process her emotions and find peace. Her first piece back was simple, a single tree standing alone in a vast open field, its branches reaching toward the sky. The colors were soft, muted, reflecting the sense of calm she had found during her time off. The tree was a symbol of her own growth, standing tall after the storm, but also reminding her that she could stand alone when necessary. The more Emily painted, the more she realized something important: she didn't have to be everything to everyone. She was enough, just as she was. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to embrace that truth. As Emily stood back to admire her work, she smiled to herself. The journey had been long, and it had been hard. But it had also been beautiful. And as much as she had feared losing her spark, she now understood that it wasn't about the flame that others expected to see, it was about the quiet warmth that she had found within herself. Her art was no longer about proving something to the world, it was about telling her own story, healing through creation, and sharing her journey with others. The ripple effect of her work wasn't just measured in the money raised for cancer research or the recognition she had gained, it was felt in the hearts of those who had found solace in her paintings. Despite Emily's newfound sense of peace and purpose, life was never without its challenges. Her break from the pressure of constant expectations had been exactly what she needed, but as she continued to work in her studio, she couldn't help but feel the subtle, persistent nagging in the back of her mind. Her journey with cancer was not over. In fact, the fight had just entered a new stage. The routine of chemotherapy had become more familiar, but it had not become any easier. Every treatment left her weaker than the last, and the fatigue was constant, like a shadow she could never escape. As much as she tried to focus on her art and the healing it brought, there were moments when the weight of her illness loomed larger than anything else. There were days when the pain and the uncertainty of the future became too overwhelming to ignore, and she felt like she was back at square one, unsure, fragile, and vulnerable. Emily had taken a step forward, but in those quieter moments, it felt like she had been pushed several steps back. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling treatment session, she returned home to find a letter waiting for her. It was from a prestigious art gallery in New York City. Emily had submitted her work months ago, and she had long since given up on hearing back. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope, her heart racing. The letter was formal, professional, and to the point. But the last line was all she needed to read. "We would be honored to display your work in our upcoming exhibition on emerging artists. We believe your paintings would resonate with our audience." Emily couldn't believe what she was reading. This was it. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of, the chance to have her art shown in one of the most well-respected galleries in the world. But as the excitement swelled inside her, a sense of dread crept in. She wasn't sure she had the energy to pull it off. Would she be able to complete the work in time? Could she travel to New York? Could she even stand in front of her paintings, knowing the toll it was taking on her body to just get through the day? Her fingers hovered over the phone as she considered reaching out to Clint for advice. But she stopped herself. What would he say? Would he think she was making excuses, that she was backing out just when things were looking up? She didn't want to disappoint him, or anyone else, for that matter. The last thing she wanted was to appear weak in front of those who had supported her. But the truth was, Emily wasn't sure what her body could handle anymore. Every step forward seemed to come with a setback, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep up this pace. The following day, Emily went for a walk in the park, trying to clear her mind. The crisp air filled her lungs, and the gentle rustling of the leaves provided a soothing soundtrack to her wandering thoughts. She thought about how far she had come, how much she had already accomplished. But there, in the quiet of the park, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had already reached her limit. She had poured so much into her art, her fight against cancer, and the expectations of others, that there was nothing left for her. She sat down on a bench, her eyes welling with tears. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely lost. In that moment, Clint appeared. He must have seen her from a distance because, within seconds, he was sitting beside her, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're doing it again, aren't you?" Clint asked gently. Emily wiped her eyes, surprised that he had read her so easily. "What do you mean?" "You're putting pressure on yourself to do everything perfectly. You think you have to say yes to every opportunity, to keep pushing through, even when you're exhausted." Clint leaned forward, his tone soft but firm. "But Emily, you don't have to do it all. You've already done so much. You've made an impact. You've inspired people. And you've proven that art is more than just a career, it's a way of healing. But you have to heal yourself first." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I just don't want to disappoint anyone. The gallery in New York is a dream come true, and I don't want to waste that opportunity." Clint nodded thoughtfully. "You don't have to make any decisions today. And you don't have to do this on your own. Take a step back. Ask yourself what you need, not what the world needs from you. Sometimes the best thing we can do for others is take care of ourselves first." He was right. She had been so focused on everyone else's expectations that she had forgotten to check in with herself. She didn't have to do it all. She could take a step back, say no when necessary, and find a way to move forward that felt right for her. That night, Emily made the difficult decision to decline the invitation from the New York gallery. It wasn't an easy choice, and it wasn't one she made lightly, but it was the right one. She needed to focus on her health, on healing, not just physically but emotionally as well. The decision didn't feel like a failure. Instead, it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was learning, slowly, that it was okay to say no. It didn't make her weak or less capable, it made her human. The next day, she called the gallery. "Thank you so much for the opportunity," she said, her voice steady. "It means the world to me, but I have to focus on my health right now. I hope there will be other chances in the future." The person on the other end of the line was understanding, even supportive. "Of course, Emily. We'll keep an eye on your work. And whenever you're ready, we'll be here." As she hung up the phone, Emily smiled. It wasn't the news she had hoped to share, but it was the truth. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Emily continued to paint, but without the constant pressure to meet deadlines or expectations. She focused on pieces that reflected her inner peace, her personal journey, not for the accolades, but for herself. And slowly, she found a rhythm. A pace that worked for her. She was still fighting, still battling cancer, but now, she was doing it on her terms. And that, she realized, was the true victory. The weeks following Emily's decision to prioritize her health were transformative. By giving herself permission to step back from the overwhelming expectations she had placed on herself, she was able to rediscover her love for painting in a way she hadn't realized she had lost. Each stroke of the brush felt more deliberate, more connected to the deep well of emotions she had been holding back. For the first time in a long while, her paintings began to feel like an honest reflection of her heart, not something designed to impress or meet an external goal. But life, as it often does, threw an unexpected curveball her way. One rainy afternoon, Emily was in her studio, working on a new piece, when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something inside her made her pick up. "Hello," she answered, wiping her hands on a cloth. Emily, a deep voice on the other end of the line asked. This is Jack from the hospital. I'm calling about the donation you made for the Cancer Research Fund. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Yes, I remember. What's this about? Well, we've had an incredible response to your donation and artwork, and we wanted to let you know that we've selected you for a very special program. It's a unique opportunity to receive additional support in your treatment. We've partnered with some of the best doctors and holistic healers, and we want to offer you a chance to be a part of this. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had heard of experimental treatment programs like this before, but they were always for patients who were in later stages, those who had exhausted all other options. Emily didn't think she was there yet. She was still fighting, still going through the standard rounds of chemotherapy. I don't know if I qualify, she said, hesitating. I'm not. It's not just about your current status, Emily, Jack interrupted gently. It's about your spirit. The way you've used your art to raise awareness and funds for cancer research, that's something we want to celebrate and support. We're offering this opportunity to a select few patients who have shown extraordinary strength in the fight. And your story has inspired so many. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't thought about it that way, how much her art and her journey had impacted others. She had been so focused on her own struggles that she hadn't fully realized how her story was touching the lives of those around her. This sounds incredible, Emily said, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. What do I need to do to be a part of it? The man on the other end of the line explained the next steps, a series of consultations with doctors and specialists, both conventional and alternative, to create a personalized treatment plan for her. She would also be invited to a special retreat for cancer patients, where she could relax, receive support, and connect with others in similar situations. It was an unexpected gift, an opportunity to not only receive medical care but also emotional and mental support. Emily knew it would be a long road, but for the first time in months, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Later that evening, after the call ended, Emily sat quietly at her kitchen table, reflecting on everything that had happened in the last few months. She thought about the auction, the recognition she had received, and the unexpected bond she had formed with Clint. And now, this. She was overwhelmed, but in the best possible way. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text message from Sarah. How's the painting going? And how's the chemo? Let's catch up soon. I miss you. Emily smiled as she typed a response. It's been going better. I'm getting my rhythm back. Chemo is tough, but I'm pushing through. Miss you too. Let's talk soon. But as she hit send, she felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't told Sarah about the special treatment program or the retreat yet. It wasn't that she didn't want to, it was just that, in a way, it felt too surreal, like something that only happened to other people, not her. But Sarah was her best friend. She knew everything, or at least she thought she did. The next day, Emily met Clint for coffee. They sat at a small cafe, tucked in the corner by the window, watching the rain pour outside. She had invited him out, partly to catch up but also to talk about the next steps in her journey. She knew he would have valuable advice, just like always. So, what's been going on with you? Clint asked, his usual warm smile lighting up his face as he took a sip of his coffee. Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking. I got a call yesterday from the hospital. They're offering me a spot in a special treatment program, something that combines traditional methods with alternative therapies. It's supposed to be for patients who have shown resilience in the fight, and they want to support me further. Clint's eyebrows lifted, a proud smile spreading across his face. That's incredible, Emily. You've earned that. You've been through so much, and you're still going strong. This could make a real difference. Emily felt a rush of emotion. She had been nervous to share this with Clint, not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't want to seem like she was taking advantage of her story. But Clint's genuine enthusiasm reassured her. "You're right," she said, nodding slowly. "I've been feeling like I'm barely keeping up with everything lately, but this feels different. Like it's not just about surviving cancer anymore. It's about thriving, about learning to live fully, even through the hardest times." As they continued to talk, Emily felt a sense of calm settle over her. She realized that the decision to accept this opportunity wasn't about needing to be fixed, it was about embracing a new way of healing, one that allowed her to balance the physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of her journey. That evening, Emily called Sarah to share the news. She had been holding off, but now she felt ready to open up. "Sarah, I've got something to tell you," Emily said, her voice filled with anticipation. "I got into a special cancer treatment program. It's not just chemo. They're offering me holistic care and even a retreat to focus on healing my mind and spirit." Sarah's voice crackled with excitement over the phone. "Emily, that's amazing. You deserve this, you really do." As Emily spoke with Sarah, she realized just how much her life had changed in a few short months. What had started as an act of desperation, selling her artwork for chemo, had turned into a journey of transformation. She had found new strength in unexpected places, and now, with this opportunity ahead of her, it felt like her battle was no longer just a fight to survive, it was a fight to live, fully and completely. And for the first time in a long time, Emily was ready to take on whatever came next, with all the hope and courage she had within her. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following Emily's decision to accept the treatment program felt like a whirlwind. The anticipation of the retreat and the specialized care she would be receiving made her feel like she was stepping into a new world, one where she would be given the tools not just to survive, but to thrive. For the first time in a while, she wasn't simply reacting to the cancer in her body, she was preparing to fight on her own terms. The retreat was located in the foothills of a remote mountain range, far from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. The organizers promised that the peaceful environment, coupled with the focus on holistic care, would allow the participants to heal in a way that traditional medicine alone could never provide. It sounded like something out of a dream, but it was real. Emily was going. She packed her bags carefully, taking only the essentials, her art supplies, her journal, and a few personal items that would help her feel at home in the unfamiliar surroundings. As she packed, a part of her felt guilty for leaving behind her studio, her friends, and her work. It had taken everything in her to build the momentum she had, and now she was leaving it all behind, even if just for a short time. But Clint had been adamant, this retreat was an opportunity to recharge in a way that would ultimately make her a stronger artist and a more grounded person. "You'll come back with new eyes," Clint had told her over coffee one afternoon. "You'll see the world and your art through a lens of peace, not just pain." Upon arriving at the retreat, Emily was greeted with warm smiles and a calming atmosphere that immediately put her at ease. The retreat center was a beautiful blend of rustic charm and modern comfort, nestled in the heart of nature. The rooms were simple but inviting, with large windows that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains and valleys. The first evening was a quiet one. There was no pressure, no schedules, just an invitation to settle in and get comfortable. The staff, which included a mix of holistic health experts, nutritionists, and counselors, made sure that every participant felt cared for. As the days went by, Emily began to immerse herself in the various programs designed to complement her medical treatment. She participated in yoga classes that focused on gentle movement and breath work, practiced guided meditation, and attended nutrition seminars that helped her understand the healing power of food. But it was the art therapy sessions that truly captivated her. Every morning, she was invited to join a small group of fellow retreat attendees in a large, sunlit studio, where they could paint, draw, or sculpt as a way of processing their emotions. The sessions were freeform, there were no rules, no expectations, only the chance to express themselves through art. At first, Emily felt unsure. How could she possibly create art without the pressure of an upcoming gallery exhibition or the need to raise money for chemo? For so long, her art had been tied to a sense of urgency and necessity. But here, in this peaceful space, she was being encouraged to paint purely for the sake of her soul. She took a deep breath, picked up her brush, and began to paint. It didn't take long before she felt the shift. As her brush strokes moved across the canvas, she realized that she was painting not just the scenes of nature around her, but also the inner landscapes of her heart. Every stroke felt like a release, as if she was shedding layers of the fear, stress, and uncertainty that had been building up inside her for so long. One morning, as she painted a particularly vibrant scene of a sunrise over the mountains, one of the therapists, a soft-spoken woman named Julia, came over to observe. "This piece is beautiful, Emily," Julia said, her voice gentle but full of admiration. "You're capturing something profound here. I can see the healing in your brushstrokes. How are you feeling as you paint?" Emily paused, considering the question for a moment. "I feel lighter," she said. "Like I'm letting go of everything I've been holding on to. This retreat it's exactly what I needed." Julia smiled warmly. Art can be incredibly therapeutic, especially when we approach it without the need to prove anything. Sometimes, the most powerful art comes from the moments when we're able to truly release, without the weight of expectation. Emily felt a deep connection to Julia's words. It was true, she had been so focused on impressing others with her art, on making it something that would be seen, appreciated, and bought. But here, in this space, the only thing that mattered was the act of creation itself. As the days passed, Emily began to feel her body healing in ways she hadn't anticipated. The chemotherapy treatments continued, but the complementary therapies, like the acupuncture sessions and the meditative nature walks, were giving her a sense of calm that she hadn't felt in months. It was as if the weight of her diagnosis was no longer defining her. She was beginning to remember who she was outside of the cancer, outside of the fight. She was an artist, a friend, a sister, and a woman who had the right to heal on her own terms. One evening, during a group session, Emily found herself sitting beside a woman named Grace. Grace had been attending the retreat for a few weeks and had already undergone multiple rounds of treatment. She was a soft-spoken, older woman with a gentle presence, and Emily had been drawn to her quiet strength. "Tell me about your art," Grace asked, breaking the silence between them. "What do you like to create?" Emily hesitated for a moment before responding. "I've always loved landscapes. But lately, I've been painting more abstract work. It feels like the right way to express everything I've been going through." Grace nodded thoughtfully. "Art has a way of guiding us, doesn't it? It gives voice to the things we can't always put into words. When I was first diagnosed, I had no idea how to cope. But I found that painting became my way of understanding my own journey. Each stroke was a step forward." Emily smiled softly, moved by Grace's words. "It's been like that for me too. I never realized how much I was holding back until I started painting again. It's like a release." The two women sat in companionable silence, looking out at the setting sun, which painted the sky in shades of pink and purple. For a moment, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. She was no longer alone in this journey. The people around her, both the staff and the other patients, had become part of her healing story. By the time the retreat was drawing to a close, Emily felt stronger. She wasn't completely healed, her body was still fighting, but emotionally and mentally, she had found a new kind of peace. She knew the path ahead would be challenging, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. She had rediscovered herself in a way she hadn't expected. Through the retreat, she had found not just a new treatment plan, but a new outlook on life. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. And with that renewed sense of purpose, she returned to her studio, ready to create art that was not just beautiful, but healing. Her brushes and paints, which had once seemed like tools of pressure and expectation, now appeared before her as instruments of release. She no longer saw her art as a means to an end, whether that end was financial survival or outside validation. It was simply about creation, about finding her voice again in the midst of all the chaos. Emily spent the first few days back at her studio in silence, soaking in the newfound clarity that the retreat had given her. She allowed herself to explore different styles, experimenting with textures and colors that felt right for her. She painted freely, no deadlines, no pressure. There was only her, the canvas, and the raw emotions that had been waiting to be set free. Her most recent work, a series of abstract pieces inspired by the natural landscapes she had seen at the retreat, began to take shape. The swirling colors and layered textures reflected the turbulence and peace she had experienced in her own journey. The paintings were bold and raw, capturing both the pain and the hope that lived inside her. It was, in a sense, a visual journal of her healing process. Clint had been right. She could see the world, and her art, through a new lens. But even as she reveled in the creative freedom, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something else was on the horizon. The retreat had opened her eyes to the idea that healing wasn't just about the body, it was about community and connection. That was something she needed to carry forward. A few days later, Emily met Clint for lunch at a small cafe near her studio. They sat at a corner booth, sipping iced tea as the afternoon sun filtered through the windows. Clint was his usual steady self, but Emily could sense a quiet pride in his eyes, a pride for the journey she had undertaken. "How's the art going?" he asked, leaning back in his seat. Emily smiled, feeling a rush of excitement. "It's going better than I expected. I've been experimenting with new techniques, new ideas. It's not perfect, but I don't care about that anymore. I just want to create." Clint raised his glass to her. "That's exactly the attitude you need. The art will come, and it will be more authentic than ever. You found something deeper in yourself." Emily's heart swelled. She had needed that reminder, that it wasn't about perfection, but authenticity. She had been so caught up in creating work that would be liked or bought that she had forgotten why she started painting in the first place. "I think I'm ready to share some of it," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just online, but in a gallery or somewhere people can really see it. But I want it to be more than just an art show. I want it to mean something." Clint leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You've always wanted your art to be more than just something pretty to look at. You've wanted it to tell a story. And it does. Now, more than ever, your story is one of strength, survival, and healing. I think the world needs to see that." Emily took a deep breath, feeling a surge of inspiration. "I've been thinking a lot about how to share it. Maybe it's time for a new kind of exhibition, one that ties in with my journey, but also raises awareness for others who are fighting cancer. What if I could use my art to continue raising funds for treatment programs? Maybe I could even get some support from the community, people who have helped me along the way." Clint's eyes lit up. "Now that's a brilliant idea. Not only are you sharing your story, but you're continuing to make a difference for others. People will see the value in supporting this, especially when they see how much heart you've put into it." For the first time since her diagnosis, Emily felt the spark of excitement she had once felt when thinking about her art. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore, she was reawakening her passion and purpose. The journey wasn't just about surviving cancer, it was about using her voice, her story, and her art to help others find hope. Over the next few weeks, Emily threw herself into planning her exhibition. She began to research local venues, reaching out to galleries and event spaces that might be open to hosting her work. She also connected with cancer support groups and non-profit organizations that might be willing to partner with her to raise awareness and funds. The more she researched, the more she realized how much of a need there was for support. Cancer treatment was expensive, and many people, especially those without adequate insurance, were struggling to afford the care they needed. She could make a difference. She could help. As the plans for the exhibition began to take shape, Emily reached out to her friend Sarah to get her thoughts. Sarah had been a steady source of support throughout the entire process, from the early days when Emily first sold her art to pay for chemotherapy to the time spent at the retreat. Sarah's encouragement had helped Emily stay focused on what truly mattered. "That sounds amazing, Emily," Sarah said when she heard about the exhibition. "You've come so far, and now you're giving back in such a meaningful way. I know the people who attend will be inspired by you and your work." Emily smiled. "I just want them to know that they're not alone. I want them to see that there's hope, even in the darkest moments. I've been there. I know what it feels like. And I want to share that." As Emily worked on her exhibition, something else unexpected happened. Clint came through with a surprise. "Emily," he said one day when they were having coffee at the studio, "I've talked to some people. I think we've got a pretty big surprise for your show. I've managed to arrange a special guest to come and speak at the opening night." Emily looked up from her easel, her eyebrows furrowed. "A special guest? Who?" Clint's smile was slow, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Let's just say he's someone you've admired for a very long time. Someone who knows exactly what it's like to fight a tough battle and come out on top. A little surprise to add something extra to the evening." Emily's mind raced. Could it really be? Could it be someone she had only dreamed of meeting? She took a deep breath, her excitement bubbling over. "Who is it?" Clint leaned in closer. "Clint Eastwood." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. "Clint Eastwood? Are you serious?" Clint chuckled. "Yes. I've spoken to him about your journey and your exhibition. He's agreed to come and say a few words. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." The realization hit her like a tidal wave. The man who had become a symbol of strength, resilience, and determination in the world of cinema was about to show his support for her. It was surreal, incredible, and beyond anything she had ever imagined. And as the day of the exhibition approached, Emily couldn't help but feel that her entire journey had led to this moment, the moment when her art would not only heal her but also touch the lives of countless others. The night before the exhibition was a whirlwind of emotions for Emily. After months of preparation, the big day had finally arrived. The gallery was set up, the paintings were hung, and the special guests had confirmed their attendance. There was only one thing left to do: show up. Emily stood in front of her studio mirror, looking at herself, taking a deep breath. Her reflection stared back at her, someone she almost didn't recognize. Her face, still carrying the subtle marks of chemotherapy, had a glow she hadn't noticed in years. It was the glow of someone who had not only survived but had found a renewed sense of purpose. Her eyes, usually filled with uncertainty and fear, now sparkled with a quiet strength. She was ready. Tonight wasn't just about showing her art. It wasn't even about raising money for cancer treatment, though that was a huge part of it. No, tonight was about telling her story. It was about being vulnerable and brave all at once. She wasn't just an artist anymore, she was a woman who had fought for her life, and now, through her work, she was offering a hand to anyone who felt as lost as she had once felt. But there was an undercurrent of anxiety that couldn't be ignored. The thought of Clint Eastwood attending, of him speaking at her exhibition, was still surreal. The man whose films had shaped so much of her understanding of strength and resilience was about to walk into her world. The thought of meeting him sent a rush of nervous excitement through her. And yet, she knew deep down that it wasn't about Clint Eastwood or any other celebrity. It was about the people who had supported her through this entire journey, her friends, her family, the strangers who had become part of her healing story. It was about the community coming together to make a difference. As she finished getting ready, Emily placed her hands on the counter and closed her eyes. A sense of calm washed over her. This was her moment. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of what cancer had taken from her, afraid of what the future might hold. But today, she was no longer defined by her illness. She was defined by her strength, her art, and the way she had chosen to live despite it all. The gallery was buzzing with activity by the time Emily arrived. The warm lighting, the carefully arranged paintings, and the soft hum of conversation created an atmosphere that felt alive, vibrant. Emily couldn't help but be swept up in the excitement, even as her heart raced with nerves. Clint had been right there with her from the start of the evening, offering a few words of encouragement as they prepared to greet the first guests. His presence was reassuring, steady and calm, just as it always had been. The guests were an eclectic mix of people, local art enthusiasts, cancer survivors, and some who had come in support of the charity aspect of the event. Emily recognized many faces from her journey, people who had contributed to her cause or helped her raise funds for her treatments. It was humbling to see how much support she had gathered in such a short time. The energy in the room was contagious, a collective feeling of hope and shared purpose. It was more than just an art show, it was a gathering of people who understood the importance of community, of coming together to lift each other up in the hardest times. Emily stood near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived. It was overwhelming at first, the sea of faces all eager to see her work, to hear her story. Each conversation, though brief, was a small victory. It reminded her that she was not alone in this fight, that there was an entire world outside her studio, a world filled with individuals who understood and cared. At exactly 7 p.m., Clint Eastwood arrived. The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment as he walked in, accompanied by his small entourage. The legendary actor and director was dressed simply but with an air of quiet confidence, just as Emily had imagined him. There was no fanfare, no flashing cameras, just Clint, walking into the room like any other guest, though everyone who saw him knew this was a moment that would be remembered. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Clint Eastwood. Here. In her space. It was almost too much to process. When their eyes met, Clint smiled warmly, and Emily could feel her nerves ease. "Emily," he said, his voice as gravelly as she had imagined. "It's an honor to be here. Your work is incredible." "Thank you," Emily said, her voice shaking slightly. "I can't believe you're here." Clint gave a slight chuckle. "I'm honored to be part of something that means so much. Your art speaks to something deeper, something universal. You're doing a beautiful thing here, not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever struggled." Emily's eyes welled with tears. This man, someone she had looked up to her entire life, was standing in front of her, validating everything she had worked for. He was not only acknowledging her talent, but also her resilience, her fight, and the heart behind her art. "I hope it means something," Emily said, her voice soft. "I want to help people. I want to show them that there's still hope. Even when things feel impossible." Clint nodded, his gaze intense. "You're doing that. You're showing people that strength can come from the most unexpected places. And that's the kind of strength that changes lives." The night went by in a blur of conversation, laughter, and admiration for Emily's work. She watched as guests stood in front of her paintings, their eyes filling with emotion as they took in the vibrant colors and the raw honesty of the pieces. Some nodded, others whispered to their companions, and some even took a moment to touch the canvases, as if they could feel the energy Emily had poured into every brushstroke. At one point, Clint was called up to speak. The crowd quieted as he took the stage, his presence commanding yet humble. Emily stood to the side, her breath caught in her chest, as Clint began to speak. "I've spent my career telling stories on screen," Clint began, his voice steady and calm. "But the story of Emily's art, her journey, this is a story of strength, resilience, and hope. What we're witnessing here tonight is more than just an exhibition. It's a testament to the power of the human spirit." Emily's heart swelled as Clint spoke. She had never imagined hearing such words from him. This wasn't just a celebrity endorsement, this was a recognition of everything she had been through, everything she had worked for. As Clint finished speaking, he turned to Emily and extended his hand. "You've inspired us all. I'm proud to be here to witness your journey." Emily, overwhelmed, shook his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." The rest of the evening was filled with warmth and connection. The exhibition had been a success beyond Emily's wildest dreams. People shared stories of their own battles, of how her art had resonated with them in ways she hadn't expected. By the end of the night, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had opened her heart and shared her story with the world. And in doing so, she had created not just art, but a bridge between herself and everyone who had walked similar paths. As the last guest left, Emily stood by the door, a contented smile on her face. Clint had come, spoken, and left behind a mark on the evening that would never fade. The exhibition had raised more funds than she had hoped for, and most importantly, it had sparked a conversation, a movement of sorts, that would continue long after the night ended. As she closed the door behind her, Emily felt something inside her shift. This was only the beginning. The day after the exhibition, Emily woke up to an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The exhaustion of the night before was still there, but it was paired with a deep contentment. The opening night had far exceeded her expectations, more people showed up than she had ever imagined, and the funds raised were more than enough to support multiple cancer treatment programs. Emily's heart swelled with pride and a sense of accomplishment. She had done it. She had not only shared her art but also made a meaningful impact in the lives of others. But as she sipped her morning coffee and scrolled through her phone, she realized the real work was just beginning. News of the exhibition had spread far beyond her local community, and the messages and emails began pouring in. People from all over the country were reaching out to her, sharing their own stories of survival, struggle, and hope. Some wanted to purchase her paintings, while others simply wanted to tell her how much her story had touched them. Among the messages was a letter from an art institute in New York, offering her the opportunity to showcase her work in a solo exhibition. Emily had always dreamed of exhibiting her art in a major city, but it had never seemed like a reality, until now. The thought of her work being displayed in such a prestigious venue took her breath away. She stared at the letter for a long time, trying to absorb what was in front of her. Was she really ready for this? Was she ready for the big stage, for the kind of attention that came with being recognized on a national scale? A knock on the door broke her train of thought. It was Clint. "Morning," he greeted her, stepping inside. "I thought I'd drop by and see how you're doing after last night." "You were amazing, Emily. I don't think I've ever seen an exhibition with that kind of energy." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "Thank you, Clint. It was everything I hoped for and more. But now, I'm trying to figure out what comes next." Clint raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean?" She handed him the letter from the Art Institute. "This came in today. They want me to have a solo show in New York." Clint read the letter, his face lighting up. "Emily, this is huge. It's the kind of opportunity most artists dream about. You've earned this. You've done the hard work, and now it's paying off." "I don't know," Emily replied, her fingers nervously tapping on her coffee cup. "It's all moving so fast. I never thought I'd be here, let alone in New York City. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of spotlight." Clint leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "You're more than ready. You've been through more than most people could handle, and you've come out the other side stronger and more determined. This is your moment, Emily. Don't let fear hold you back." Her chest tightened as she listened to his words. She had always been afraid of what the future held. Cancer had forced her to confront her own mortality, and sometimes it felt safer to stay small, to not dream too big. But Clint was right. She had already faced her biggest fear and survived. What was stopping her from taking this next step? "Do you really think so?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know so," Clint said with a smile. You've got the talent, the heart, and the story. The world needs to hear what you have to say. And there's no better place than New York to make that happen. The next few days were a blur of preparations and decision-making. Emily found herself facing a crossroads: stay in her familiar studio, where she had begun this journey, or take the leap and dive into the unknown. The thought of moving to New York, of living in a city that never slept, both thrilled and terrified her. But as she stood in front of her easel, staring at the latest painting she had been working on, Emily realized something important: this wasn't just about her. It wasn't about the pressure to succeed or the recognition that might come with it. It was about continuing to tell her story, to help others, to be the voice for those who didn't yet have the courage to speak up. Her art had always been a reflection of her journey, and now, that journey was expanding. A week later, Emily stood at the edge of her old studio, the sun setting behind her. She had made her decision. She was going to New York. The gallery had arranged a series of meetings and interviews for her, and she had begun making plans for the move. Her heart raced as she thought about the life that awaited her. It was a world away from the small town she had always known, a world filled with endless possibilities and challenges. But with the support of Clint and the encouragement from her newfound community, Emily felt ready to embrace whatever came next. She wasn't just taking her art to New York, she was taking her story, her survival, her message of hope. She was going to be a voice for others who were still fighting, still struggling to find their way. The move to New York was not without its hurdles. The city was overwhelming in its vastness, its pace, and its relentless energy. But Emily dove in headfirst, throwing herself into the preparations for her exhibition. The gallery, a sleek and modern space in Chelsea, was everything she had dreamed of. She spent countless hours curating the show, choosing the paintings that spoke to her most deeply, the ones that told her story in the truest way. It was difficult, but each brushstroke felt like a step forward. With each piece, Emily saw her own growth reflected back at her, the vulnerability, the strength, the rawness of her journey. She was no longer just an artist painting for survival. She was an artist painting for purpose. The night before her exhibition in New York, Emily stood in the middle of the gallery, her heart racing. The space was empty for now, but in a few short hours, it would be filled with people, critics, art enthusiasts, cancer survivors, and more. As she looked around the gallery, Clint's words echoed in her mind: the world needs to hear what you have to say. And as Emily stood in front of her paintings, she realized that the time to speak had come. The night had finally arrived. Emily stood in front of the gallery, her hand resting on the cool glass door. She could feel the electric hum of the city vibrating through her fingertips, a mix of excitement and anticipation hanging thick in the air. The lights of New York City flickered in the distance, casting shadows across the sidewalk. People were beginning to trickle into the gallery, their laughter and voices adding to the growing energy that filled the space. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was it. This was the moment she had been working for, the culmination of everything she had fought for. But as the clock ticked closer to opening time, her nerves started to mount. She had never felt so exposed. The gallery was far grander than anything she had ever imagined. This was New York, after all, the center of the art world. The pressure to impress, to live up to expectations, felt heavier with every passing second. But just as she was starting to second-guess herself, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Clint. "You ready?" he asked, his voice calm and reassuring. Emily turned to face him, grateful for his steady presence. Clint had been with her throughout this entire journey, through the darkest moments and the brightest. His support had been invaluable, especially now, when the weight of the night felt unbearable. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head slightly. "This place. It's so big. What if I'm not enough for this? What if they don't like my work?" Clint smiled gently. "You've already done more than enough. Your work speaks for itself. People here don't just come for the art, they come for the artist, for your story." They come to see you, Emily. And you have more than enough to offer. Her heart swelled at his words, but the doubt remained, lingering in the back of her mind. What if she failed? As Clint squeezed her shoulder and stepped back, a voice from the entrance interrupted her thoughts. Is this the famous Emily? A voice called out. Emily turned to find a man walking toward her, his tall frame and dark suit making him stand out. He was followed by a woman with sharp features, her gaze scanning the room. It took Emily a second to recognize him, but when she did, her breath caught in her throat. It was Liam O'Connor, a well-known art critic who had written about some of the biggest names in the industry. He was known for his sharp pen and even sharper opinions. And here he was, standing in front of her. Liam smiled widely as he extended his hand. I've heard so much about you, Emily. It's an honor to meet you. Emily's throat went dry as she shook his hand. Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. It's a pleasure to meet you, too. The woman standing beside him gave Emily a nod. I'm Grace. Liam and I work together. We've been following your journey for a while now. I must say, your story is inspiring. Emily managed a smile, though her nerves only grew as she realized the weight of the situation. She was no longer just an artist, she was under scrutiny, her work being examined by some of the most important people in the art world. Liam, sensing her discomfort, leaned in a little closer. Don't worry, he said softly. You've already won. The world is about to see what we've all been talking about. This place is going to be buzzing with your name soon enough. Just remember to enjoy this moment. The words helped, but they didn't take away the anxiety that tightened in her chest. She had come so far, but this was the first time her art would be on display for such an influential crowd. What if it wasn't good enough? As the evening went on, more and more people arrived. Guests filled the space, mingling with wine glasses in hand, admiring the paintings that lined the walls. Emily watched from the side as people stopped in front of her pieces, some talking in hushed tones, others simply standing in silence as they took it all in. She was surrounded by the hum of conversation, but somehow, she felt like she was in a bubble. It felt both surreal and painfully real, the weight of her journey visible in every stroke of paint, every piece of herself she had poured into the canvas. But something shifted as she walked through the gallery, taking in the reactions of the people who had come to see her work. She saw tears in some eyes, smiles in others. A woman in her 50s, her arms crossed, leaned in to inspect one of Emily's pieces and whispered to her companion, this is what I've been waiting for. She really captures the raw emotion of living with cancer. Emily stood there, listening, feeling the power of those words settle in her chest. This wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about connection. It was about people seeing her struggle, her resilience, and feeling something that resonated with their own experiences. As the night wore on, the crowd continued to grow, the energy building as the evening hit its peak. Emily found herself standing beside Clint again, feeling a sense of calm settle in her heart as she watched the interactions around her. People were genuinely moved by her work. The conversations that took place weren't just about the technicalities of the art, they were about the emotions and stories behind each painting. People were opening up, sharing their experiences with cancer, with life, with survival. Liam O'Connor made his way toward her at one point, his expression thoughtful. Emily, I've seen a lot of exhibitions in my time, but what you've done here is something else. Your art is raw, emotional, and powerful. It doesn't just speak to the audience, it shakes them. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of you. Emily couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. The validation she had longed for didn't come from the applause or the praise, it came from knowing that her work had touched people, that her story had made a difference. She had feared for so long that she wouldn't be enough. But in this moment, surrounded by the people who had come to support her and her mission, she felt whole. As the evening came to a close, Emily stood by the door, thanking guests for coming as they filed out. Clint had slipped away earlier, his work done for the night, but Emily knew he was there in spirit. She could feel his encouragement guiding her every step. One of the last guests of the evening was Grace, Liam's colleague. She approached Emily with a smile and handed her a small card. "You have a future ahead of you, Emily. Don't let this be the last time I see you at the center of an exhibition. I'll be in touch." Emily accepted the card, overwhelmed by the promise of what was to come. Her journey was only just beginning, and there were no limits to what she could achieve. As the door closed behind the final guest, Emily stood alone in the gallery, a quiet smile forming on her lips. She had arrived. The week following the exhibition was a blur of phone calls, emails, and messages from all corners of the art world. Emily couldn't help but feel like she was in a dream. Invitations to other galleries, offers to collaborate with charities, and, most excitingly, the request to have her artwork featured in a prominent museum's collection. But amidst all the excitement, there was one email that stood out, and it would change everything. It was late one evening when Emily opened an email from a name she didn't recognize at first, Riley Fitzgerald, Senior Director at the Ainsley Foundation. Riley's email was polite but to the point. The foundation had seen the success of her recent exhibition and wanted to discuss a potential collaboration. However, it wasn't just a collaboration, it was something far more significant. The Ainsley Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting young cancer patients and their families, wanted Emily to work with them directly to create a series of paintings that would help raise awareness for childhood cancer. The idea was to produce a traveling exhibit, one that would not only show her work but also feature the stories of young cancer fighters and survivors. It was a monumental opportunity, one that could provide her with a platform to amplify the voices of those who had been forgotten in the larger conversation about cancer. Emily read the email twice, making sure she wasn't misinterpreting anything. This wasn't just another gallery showing. This was a chance to make an even bigger impact. She quickly dialed Clint, her heart pounding in her chest. "Clint," she said breathlessly when he picked up, "you won't believe this. The Ainsley Foundation, they want to work with me. They want me to create an entire series for them, to travel with the stories of kids fighting cancer." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Clint's voice, though quiet, was filled with emotion. "Emily, that's incredible. This is what I've been talking about. You're not just making art anymore. You're changing lives. This could be bigger than anything you've ever done. But I don't know." Emily hesitated. The weight of the offer felt almost too heavy. "This is huge, Clint. I'm honored, but it scares me too. It's one thing to paint for adults, but children? The responsibility. What if I can't do it right? What if I can't capture their stories in the way they deserve?" Clint's voice softened. "The fact that you're worried about doing it right means you already care. You're exactly the person who should be doing this. It's going to be challenging, yes, but you have the heart for it, Emily. You've faced your own battle. You understand more than anyone what it means to fight." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. He was right. This wasn't about her ability to paint, it was about her ability to listen, to understand, and to help tell stories that needed to be heard. "Okay," Emily whispered, her heart a little lighter. "I'll do it. I'll work with them." The next few weeks passed in a blur of excitement and preparation. Emily found herself traveling to hospitals and meeting families who had been affected by childhood cancer. Every child had a different story, a different battle, but each one shared the same fierce spirit. It was humbling, heartbreaking, and inspiring all at once. There was Sarah, a 9-year-old girl with a bright smile who had been diagnosed with leukemia at age 5. She loved drawing and had the dream of becoming an artist, just like Emily. Then there was Ethan, a 15-year-old boy who had spent most of his teenage years fighting brain cancer. His story was one of hope, despite the many setbacks he had faced. Each of these children left an indelible mark on Emily's heart. Their stories of resilience and strength would be the foundation of her new work. Emily would sit with these children and their families, listening intently as they shared their journeys. She would ask them what they loved, what they hoped for, and what they dreamed of becoming. She learned how to translate their pain, their hopes, and their triumphs into color. Her palette had shifted, no longer just about her own experience, but about something larger. Something that needed to be shared. But with this new mission came new challenges. Emily found herself grappling with her own emotions as she painted. Each piece felt deeply personal. She painted Ethan's dreams of becoming a professional soccer player, a symbol of the life he was fighting to reclaim. She painted Sarah's determination, capturing the spark in her eyes despite her illness. The weight of their stories was a constant companion as she worked late into the night, pouring her heart into every brushstroke. One evening, after a particularly emotional day of painting, Emily sat at her kitchen table, staring at the work she had just completed. The image was of a young boy, no older than 8, standing tall in the face of his diagnosis. His eyes were determined, his body poised as if ready to fight. Emily had captured his strength, his hope, but also his vulnerability. As she gazed at the painting, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Clint. "How's it going?" Emily smiled softly, her fingers hovering over the screen as she typed back. "I'm getting there. It's harder than I thought, but it feels so important. These kids are amazing, Clint. They don't just fight for themselves, they fight for everyone they love. And every time I finish a piece, I feel like they've given me something I never expected." A few seconds later, Clint's reply came through. "You're giving them something too, Emily. You're telling their stories in a way no one else can. You're helping them be seen. You're giving them a voice." Her eyes stung with tears as she read his message. It wasn't just her art that had the power to heal, it was her ability to listen and to share the stories of others. This wasn't about recognition or fame. It was about creating something that could inspire, that could spark change. It was about giving these children the power to share their journey, their fight, and their hope. The day the series was ready to be unveiled was both exhilarating and terrifying. Emily stood in front of her paintings, each one now framed and ready for the world to see. She could already feel the gravity of the moment. This exhibit was about more than just art. It was about survival. It was about resilience. It was about creating awareness and sparking change in a way that words alone could never do. As the doors opened, Emily watched as the first visitors entered. The Ainsley Foundation had invited families, media, and influencers who were passionate about childhood cancer awareness. The atmosphere was hushed, reverent, as people took in the art, standing in front of each painting as if they could feel the stories pulsing through the canvas. A couple approached Emily, their eyes wet with tears. The woman, holding a small child in her arms, stepped forward. "This," she whispered, "this is exactly what we needed. We've been through so much, and to see our story reflected in such a beautiful way. It gives us hope." Emily's heart swelled with emotion. This was why she painted. To give them a voice. To give them hope. As the evening drew to a close, Emily stood at the center of the room, surrounded by the people whose stories she had now shared with the world. She looked around, realizing that this was the beginning of something much larger than herself. Her journey had started with one painting, but now it had become so much more. She wasn't just an artist, she was a storyteller, a guide, and a voice for those who needed to be heard. And the world was listening. The months following the exhibition felt like a whirlwind. The success of Emily's partnership with the Ainsley Foundation had exceeded even her wildest expectations. The traveling exhibit went from city to city, each location drawing in larger and more diverse crowds. People were moved, not just by the art, but by the stories it represented. The stories of children who fought with everything they had and families who loved them fiercely. Emily was often invited to speak at the openings, where she shared her journey and the process behind creating the artwork. But what touched her the most was the direct impact she had on the families attending the exhibit. There was one mother, Sarah's mother, who pulled Emily aside after an event in Chicago. Her eyes glistened with tears as she clutched a framed photo of her daughter, smiling and holding up a drawing of a tree. "Sarah saw your painting of her in the exhibit," she said softly, her voice shaking. She said it made her feel like she wasn't alone anymore. Like her fight was part of something bigger. She paused, her hands trembling as she wiped away a tear. "That's the kind of hope you've given her, Emily. Thank you." In that moment, Emily realized the true power of her work. It wasn't just about creating beautiful art. It was about bringing people together, about making them feel seen and heard. This exhibit had become a platform for healing, for understanding, and for sparking change. But even as her work gained more recognition, Emily was still grappling with the deeper emotional toll it took on her. One evening, after a particularly emotional stop in Los Angeles, Emily sat in her hotel room staring at the newest piece she had completed, a portrait of a young girl named Lily who had just completed her chemotherapy treatments. Emily had spent hours with Lily and her family, learning about her journey in capturing her hope, her courage, and her bright personality. But as she painted, something deep within her began to stir, a feeling that the journey was far from over. She picked up her phone, dialing Clint's number. He answered almost immediately. "Hey, Em. How's it going?" "I'm exhausted," she replied, her voice tinged with a mixture of weariness and emotion. "It's been a beautiful ride, Clint. But sometimes it feels like I'm carrying the weight of everyone's pain on my shoulders. Every time I finish a piece, I feel like I've left a little bit of myself in it." Clint's voice softened. "I get it. But you know what? You're making a real difference. You're sharing their stories, their battles, and you're giving them a voice they might not have had otherwise. You're giving people the opportunity to see the truth of what it's like to fight cancer. And that's powerful, Emily. That's something no one can take away from you." Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "I know. But sometimes, I feel like I'm losing myself in all of this. The more I learn, the more I see, the harder it becomes to keep painting without becoming overwhelmed." "Remember, Em," Clint said gently, "you're not doing this alone. You've got a team behind you. And more than that, you've got your own story to tell. Never forget that. Everything you've been through, everything you've survived, it's part of why you can do this. But you have to take care of yourself too. Don't burn out." Emily nodded even though Clint couldn't see her. She knew he was right. She had to find a balance. She couldn't pour everything into her art without also pouring something back into herself. A few days later, Emily made a decision. She was going to take a step back for a while, at least a short one, to reconnect with herself. She reached out to Riley Fitzgerald at the Ainsley Foundation, letting him know she needed a break from the exhibit tour. They were understanding and supportive, reassuring her that her health and well-being were the most important things. It felt good to take a moment to breathe. After months of traveling, meeting new people, and constantly pouring herself into her work, Emily found herself at a quiet cabin in the mountains, away from the noise and the constant pressure of city life. She'd never been one to take time off, always pushing herself to do more, to be more. But here, in this peaceful isolation, she could finally relax and reflect. For the first time in a long time, she could feel her mind slowing down. The mountains were quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird breaking the silence. Emily spent her days hiking through the woods, painting in front of the window, and journaling about her journey. Slowly, she began to reconnect with herself, remembering what had first driven her to create art. It wasn't the accolades, the recognition, or even the money, it was the desire to share stories, to connect with people, and to bring something beautiful into the world during the darkest times. As the days passed, Emily found herself rediscovering the joy of painting, not out of obligation or pressure, but simply because it was her passion. She painted landscapes that inspired her, majestic mountains, peaceful lakes, and wide-open skies. These were the moments she had been craving, moments of stillness, moments where she could simply breathe and exist. When Emily returned to New York, she was renewed, her soul lighter, and her heart full of clarity. She knew that this journey wasn't just about creating art or raising awareness, it was about finding a deeper sense of purpose. She was ready to continue her work with the Ainsley Foundation, but she was also ready to balance her passion for painting with her need for personal time. That balance would be key in her continued success. She understood now that self-care wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Only by caring for herself could she truly continue to create and make a difference in the world. As Emily prepared for the next phase of her career, she began working on a new project, one that would bring together her past and present. She would combine the emotional intensity of the childhood cancer series with her newfound love of landscape painting, creating a collection that told the story of not just individual survival, but of healing on a broader scale. In the weeks that followed, Emily took the time to cultivate a new sense of balance. She continued her work with the Ainsley Foundation, but she also took on new projects that allowed her to explore different themes and subjects. She found herself diving into nature, creating pieces that evoked a sense of peace and serenity. And all the while, she never lost sight of the deep sense of purpose that had guided her from the beginning. Her art was no longer just a means of personal expression, it was a tool for change, for healing, and for hope. And with every new piece, she knew she was leaving a part of herself behind. But the more she gave, the more she received in return. The weeks after Emily returned to New York felt like a rebirth. Reconnecting with her own soul, rediscovering the joy of creation, and finding balance in her life had been transformative. She had learned a vital lesson: while she was passionate about her work, she couldn't pour herself out completely without taking the time to recharge. This new perspective opened the door to a deeper and more sustainable way of creating. One morning, Emily woke up to the soft glow of sunlight streaming through her window. The city felt distant in its own way. There was a stillness in the air, a silence that allowed her mind to wander freely. She had set out for a walk in the city, but today she was more drawn to the quiet solitude of her studio. As she walked past the bustling streets and honking cabs, she thought about the people she had met through her work, especially the children and families who had touched her heart so deeply. Every story she had encountered felt like a new layer of understanding, and she realized there was still so much more to explore. Emily's art had always been her way of connecting with others, of giving them a voice, but she now knew she could use it to tell the larger story of healing, the individual's journey and the collective healing of the community. The phone rang as Emily entered her studio, an unfamiliar number lighting up the screen. With a quick glance, she answered, not expecting it to be a life-altering call. "Hello, is this Emily?" a calm voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is Emily," she replied, already feeling a flicker of curiosity. "This is Dr. Martin Reyes, director of the Healing Arts Project at the Children's Hospital in Seattle. We've been following your work for the past few months, and we'd love to discuss a potential collaboration," he said, his tone professional yet warm. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was an unexpected but welcome surprise. "We're hoping you could create a series that would be displayed in our new wing dedicated to pediatric cancer patients," Dr. Reyes continued. "It would be an opportunity to bring art into a place of healing, where kids can see the strength and beauty of their stories reflected back at them. We've heard so much about your series with the Ainsley Foundation, and we believe your work would provide an incredible sense of hope and empowerment for these young patients." Emily listened intently, her thoughts racing. Another opportunity to make an impact, but this time in a more intimate setting. The idea of working directly with children, of creating something that could live in a space where young people fought their toughest battles, was moving. "I'd be honored," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This sounds like an incredible project. When can we get started?" As Emily prepared for her next major project, she found herself thinking about what it truly meant to heal. Her previous work with the Ainsley Foundation had focused on sharing stories of strength and survival, but this new venture would be different. She would be creating art not just to raise awareness, but to bring healing into a hospital space, a place where life and death existed side by side. The Healing Arts Project in Seattle was designed to be a sanctuary for children and families who were facing cancer treatments. The walls were lined with bright, colorful murals, sculptures, and paintings, all aimed at providing comfort and hope. It was a space where children could feel the power of art in a tangible way, a place where they could be surrounded by beauty and resilience. Emily's role in this project would be to create a series of portraits, each one capturing the essence of a child's journey through cancer. These wouldn't be the same kind of portraits she had done for the Ainsley Foundation. Here, she wanted to emphasize the power of community and shared experience. She wanted each painting to feel like a piece of a larger narrative, one that spoke of strength, courage, and togetherness. But the challenge was daunting. She knew these children had been through unimaginable pain and struggle, and she didn't want to oversimplify or romanticize their experiences. She wanted to honor their truth. For weeks, Emily worked closely with Dr. Reyes and the team at the hospital, meeting with patients and families, hearing their stories, and absorbing the emotional weight of what they were going through. Each conversation felt like an intimate exchange, one where she had to step into their world and understand the depth of their resilience. These children weren't just battling cancer, they were battling to keep their joy, to hold on to their innocence, and to make sure their dreams didn't fade away. One child, in particular, caught Emily's attention, Max, a 10-year-old boy with a shock of unruly blonde hair and a mischievous glint in his eyes. Max had been diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia and was currently undergoing his second round of chemotherapy. But despite his ongoing battle, he was known for his sense of humor and ability to make the other kids laugh, even on the worst days. When Emily first met him, he didn't talk much about his illness. Instead, he wanted to show her his latest drawing, a picture of a dragon flying over a city. "That's me," he said, pointing at the dragon. "I fight like him, even if I'm small." Emily was moved by the resilience and the light in Max's spirit. She knew she had to paint him. This wouldn't be just a portrait, it would be an image of his inner strength, of the fight he had inside him, and the unshakable belief that he could soar above it all. As Emily continued to work on the project, she felt herself connecting with these children in ways she hadn't expected. She had always been deeply moved by their courage, but now she was witnessing their lives up close, how each day was a battle, but also a celebration of everything they had fought for. The first of the portraits was unveiled in the hospital, and the response was overwhelming. Max's portrait hung proudly in the new wing, and parents and staff alike stopped to admire it. His fierce gaze, his posture that seemed to demand attention, and the swirling colors that surrounded him all captured the raw energy of his spirit. For the first time in her career, Emily felt the full power of her art. It wasn't just about creating something beautiful, it was about creating something that could change lives, that could make people feel seen and heard. It wasn't just a painting on the wall. It was a symbol of hope, of strength, and of the power of community. As the project progressed, Emily found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the unexpected moments, the call from Clint, the chance encounter with the Ainsley Foundation, the exhibition that had changed her life, and now, this new venture with the Healing Arts Project. All of it had come together in ways she hadn't imagined, but somehow it felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. With each brushstroke, she was shaping not just portraits, but stories of resilience, unity, and healing. And as the project came to a close, Emily knew that this was only the beginning. She had come a long way from the girl who had sold her artwork to pay for chemotherapy treatments. Now, she was an artist who was using her craft to heal, to uplift, and to remind others that, no matter how difficult life could be, there was always light to be found, even in the darkest of places. Max's portrait, with its fiery dragon and vibrant energy, had become the centerpiece of the exhibit, and it was clear that it resonated deeply with everyone who saw it. Emily could already tell that the children and their families would carry these portraits with them forever, not just as reminders of their battles, but as symbols of their unbreakable spirits. But while the project had brought her immense satisfaction, it also left Emily feeling reflective. She had poured her heart and soul into every brushstroke, every detail, and now, as she looked at the faces of the children she had painted, she felt something stirring within her. She had started this journey as a way to help others, but now, she realized, it had helped her find something deeper, her own purpose. The phone rang just as Emily was packing her bags to leave Seattle. It was Clint. "Hey, Em. I heard the exhibit was a huge success. How are you holding up?" Emily smiled, leaning back against the windowsill. "It was amazing, Clint. The kids, their families, it was like I was in the presence of superheroes. Every day, they showed me a different kind of strength, a strength I didn't even know existed." Clint's voice was warm. "You've done something incredible here. I'm proud of you. I couldn't have done it without the foundation or without the support from people like you," Emily said. "But, Clint, I'm realizing something. I'm not just telling stories anymore. I'm a part of them. The art, it's not just about creating something beautiful, it's about sharing that beauty with others. It's about making sure no one feels invisible. And I think that's what I want to keep doing. That's why your work matters, Emily. You're creating something that stays with people long after they've left. That's rare. Not everyone can do that," Clint replied. Emily took a deep breath, a sense of peace settling over her. She had come a long way from the young woman who was desperate to raise money for her chemotherapy. Now, she was creating art that told stories of courage, love, and the transformative power of community. "I've been thinking a lot about what's next," Emily said. "I want to continue this work, but I also want to expand it. I want to bring more people into these stories, let them see how healing happens through art. And I think it's time to take this project global. There are hospitals around the world that need this kind of space, this kind of hope." Clint's voice dropped with a note of excitement. "That sounds like a big leap, Em. But if anyone can do it, it's you." Over the next few months, Emily worked tirelessly to make her vision a reality. She began reaching out to hospitals and cancer treatment centers around the world, offering to help create similar healing art programs. She knew the impact her work could have, and she was determined to bring it to as many people as possible. With Clint's guidance and the continued support of the Ainsley Foundation, she began laying the groundwork for an international campaign. Her first stop was a hospital in London, where the team had already expressed interest in collaborating. They were eager to bring the healing arts project into their own pediatric oncology wing. Emily traveled there, meeting with doctors, social workers, and families, hearing their stories, and beginning the process of creating the portraits that would give the children a sense of ownership over their own healing journey. As Emily immersed herself in this new venture, she couldn't help but feel that the work she was doing now was even more powerful than what had come before. This wasn't just about showcasing art, it was about weaving a global tapestry of support, love, and shared experience. No matter where she went, the children and families she met shared the same determination, the same courage, and the same capacity for joy, even in the face of hardship. One evening, after finishing a particularly moving portrait of a young girl named Ava in London, Emily sat in her hotel room, reflecting on how far she had come. Her journey had been unpredictable, filled with unexpected turns and challenges, but she was exactly where she was meant to be. The exhibit at the Ainsley Foundation, her collaboration with the Healing Arts Project, and now, her international outreach, each of these moments had been pieces of a larger puzzle that was finally coming together. Her thoughts drifted back to Clint and their conversation months ago. He had been right, she had become a part of these stories, and they had become a part of hers. She had witnessed firsthand the power of art to heal, to connect, and to bring people together. But more than that, she had seen how love, community, and support could change lives. Emily returned to New York with a renewed sense of purpose. The project was gaining momentum, with other cities and hospitals showing interest in bringing the healing arts project to their own cancer treatment centers. She felt a new responsibility now, not just to continue creating art, but to ensure that her work had a lasting impact, to ensure that this movement was something that could continue even when she wasn't there. The day after she returned to her studio, she was met by Riley Fitzgerald from the Ainsley Foundation, who had heard about her work in London. "Emily," he said with a smile, "I've got something for you. We've been hearing incredible things about your global expansion. The board wants to help fund this. We believe in what you're doing, and we want to see this movement continue to grow." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "Riley, this means so much to me. I never imagined it would get this far." Riley nodded. "The impact you've had already is incredible. But this is just the beginning. We want to help you reach even more children, more families. Together, we can do more than just tell their stories, we can help them heal." As the year drew to a close, Emily's life had transformed in ways she couldn't have anticipated. What had started as a desperate act of love had turned into a global mission, one that was spreading hope and healing to countless people around the world. And through it all, she had learned that art wasn't just a way to express herself, it was a bridge, a tool for connection, and a means to bring light to the darkest places. It was a way to make sure no one, no matter where they were or what they were going through, ever had to feel invisible. Her story was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The new year arrived with a quiet promise. As snowflakes fluttered down from the pale winter sky outside her window in New York, Emily sat in her studio, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The rush of global attention from the Healing Arts Project, the expansion into new hospitals and treatment centers, the partnerships with foundations, none of it felt real. Yet, in the soft silence of the room, she understood that everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, had come to fruition. Emily's studio was filled with works in progress, each canvas a snapshot of hope, courage, and strength. It wasn't just about portraits of children anymore. Now, she was blending the stories of families, communities, and healthcare workers into her art. She was documenting the collective healing process, how people leaned on each other to overcome their darkest days. Her phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. It was a message from Clint, who had been following her journey every step of the way. "Emily, we've got some exciting news. I've been in touch with the team at the Kennedy Center, and they want to feature your work in an exhibit dedicated to healing through art. It's happening in just a few months, and we want you to be the centerpiece." Emily stared at the message, her heart pounding. The Kennedy Center, the place where so many of her artistic heroes had displayed their work, a place where stories of resilience and creativity were showcased for the world to see. She never could have imagined that her own work would someday be shown in such a prestigious venue. She quickly typed out a response, her fingers trembling. "Clint, this is incredible. I don't even know what to say. This is a dream come true." "I knew you were destined for something big," Clint replied. "You've earned it." The months leading up to the exhibit at the Kennedy Center were filled with anticipation. Emily had already curated a collection of her best works from the Healing Arts Project, including her portraits, but she wanted to add something new. Something personal. A piece that captured the essence of her journey, of the unexpected turns and the lessons learned along the way. She spent hours in her studio, working late into the night, mixing colors, shapes, and symbols that represented the deep impact this project had on her life. It was a large piece, a bold, abstract painting that fused the faces of children, families, and even herself, symbolizing the interconnectedness of every story she had encountered. It was a powerful piece, full of energy and emotion, and she poured every ounce of herself into it. When the day arrived to transport her art to the Kennedy Center, Emily felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had been to countless exhibits in her life, but this was different. This time, she wasn't just showing her work, she was sharing a piece of herself with the world. The night of the grand opening arrived, and the gallery was buzzing with anticipation. Visitors from all walks of life, including prominent figures in the art world, philanthropists, and healthcare professionals, gathered to witness the culmination of Emily's journey. Clint was there too, standing by her side, as proud as ever. As Emily walked through the gallery, she saw the faces of the children she had painted hanging on the walls, their stories captured in vivid colors and textures. She smiled at each portrait, proud of what she had accomplished. But it was the final piece, the abstract painting she had created for this very exhibit, that took center stage. People gathered around it, drawn to its intensity, its raw emotion. They whispered to one another, discussing its meaning, its power. Emily overheard fragments of their conversations. It's like she's poured herself into this, it's more than just a painting. It's a journey. And in many ways, that was exactly what it was, a journey. A journey that had begun in the darkest moments of Emily's life, when she was struggling with her own illness, but had blossomed into a movement that touched countless lives. A journey that had led her to a place where she not only gave others the gift of healing through art, but had also found healing for herself. The evening was filled with heartfelt speeches, awards, and recognition. At one point, Emily was called to the stage to speak about her work and the mission behind it. Her heart raced as she stood before a room full of people, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the microphone. I don't really know where to begin," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "When I started this journey, I never imagined it would take me here, to this incredible moment. I was just a girl who wanted to do something, anything, to help. But I've learned something along the way. I've learned that healing is not just something that happens to us. It's something we create together. Through love, through support, and yes, through art." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of Clint, the hospital staff she had worked with, and the families she had painted. "I stand here today because of the amazing people I've met, the children, their families, the healthcare workers. They've shown me what it means to truly fight, not just for yourself, but for each other. My art, it's just a reflection of that, of all of you." The crowd was silent, and Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, as if the room was holding its breath, listening intently. "I couldn't have done any of this without the support I've received along the way. From Clint, from the foundations, from all the hospitals and treatment centers that have welcomed me into their spaces. And from each of you who have been a part of this journey, your belief in the power of art and healing is what has made this possible. I am just one part of this larger story, and I am so grateful to be able to share it with you." The room erupted into applause, and Emily felt the tears well up in her eyes. This wasn't just about recognition. It wasn't about the accolades. It was about the people, the relationships, the lives that had been touched. It was about the healing that had taken place, not only in the lives of those she had painted, but in her own. As the evening wound down, Emily stepped outside onto the balcony of the Kennedy Center, breathing in the crisp night air. Clint joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. "To your legacy, Em," he said, raising his glass. "To all of us," she replied, clinking her glass against his. As they stood there, overlooking the illuminated city of Washington, D.C., Emily felt a profound sense of peace. Her journey had come full circle. What had begun with a simple act of kindness had grown into something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. And as she looked up at the stars above, she knew that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to do, so many more stories to share, so many more lives to touch. And no matter where her journey took her next, she would always carry the lessons she had learned, lessons about love, strength, resilience, and the power of art to heal. Her story was just beginning. And she couldn't wait to see where it would lead next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?